In my past life, Erick and I always seemed to miss each other by a hair's breadth. We finally stumbled our way into marriage, but on our wedding night, he announced he was leaving for a decade-long international aid project abroad. He abandoned me without a word for 10 years. When he finally returned, he brought back the woman he had loved in his youth, Selena. We never officially registered our marriage, nor did we consummate it. Our marriage isn't even legal. I'm getting married. It's inappropriate for you to stay in my home. Only then did I realize that what I thought was a series of unfortunate coincidences had actually been deliberate all along. While he celebrated with his family, moving into a new home and marrying someone else with pride. What about me? They say the city is filled with flowers in full bloom. Yet I arrived only to find winter's chill. Given a second chance, I decided to leave first, disappearing on the very day of our wedding. Yet at the altar of a brideless wedding, he completely fell apart. Chapter 1. Erick, your little fiancé is here to check up on you again. She's really clingy, afraid her golden boy might fly away. Huh? Yeah. Maybe she should just tie a leash around your waist. Don't say that. Look, you've made the poor girl blush. I suddenly raised my eyes, turning toward the sweet and gentle voice. It was Diana, with jet black hair, snow-white skin, and an elegant figure. Her smile was pure and sweet. She was the undisputed goddess of the architecture department. And in my past life, she was the woman Erick could never forget. The one he spent his life chasing. At this moment, it finally hit me. I had been reborn. Reborn to the time before my wedding. Erick had just taken leave to prepare for the ceremony. And Diana, the woman he brought back in my past life, was standing right here. She smiled faintly at me. Are you looking for Erick? He'll be down in a minute. Chapter 2. I stood there under the sunlight, lost in thought. Before I knew it, Erick was already walking toward me with a cold expression. What are you doing here again? He pushed through the crowd, stopping in front of me, grabbing my arm. He pulled me aside to a small path. I'm meeting up with my classmates. And you're still clinging to me? He adjusted his glasses, his face filled with irritation. Selena, the wedding is in 5 days. Can't you just give me 5 more days of freedom? The branches overhead cast patches of shade, and sunlight filtered through the leaves, scattering like shards of gold on his face. But in his eyes, there was nothing but a frost-cold indifference. I looked at the man in front of me, the man I had loved for 18 years in my past life. Now, he stood before me, young, handsome, and in his prime. But who would have guessed that beneath his flawless exterior lay a heart so ruthless and cold? I lowered my eyes and smiled faintly. Sorry, Erick. I won't bother you anymore. I turned to leave as soon as I finished speaking, but Erick grabbed my arm again. What tantrum are you throwing this time? I already agreed to marry you. What more do you want? I spun around and flung his hand away. Erick was momentarily stunned, but the disgust in his eyes quickly deepened. Selena, if you keep this up, we might as well cancel the wedding. Chapter 3. I took a deep breath, swallowing all the bitterness, resentment, heartache, and humiliation surging in my chest. Everything he did to me in my past life, I would return it all, exactly as it was. So, when I spoke again, my voice was softer. I even let a hint of grievance show in my eyes as I looked at him. I'm not making a fuss. I just had some questions about the wedding arrangements, so I came to ask for your opinion. Before I could finish, Erick waved his hand and cut me off. I don't have an opinion. I already told you, just do whatever you like. All right then, I won't ask you about the rest of the plans. Maybe it was because I behaved so obediently, or maybe, deep down, he still felt a trace of guilt. Suddenly, Erick reached out and gently ruffled my hair. All right. I'll come home early tonight and have dinner with you. I put on a delighted expression. Okay. I'll wait for you. Erick couldn't help but smile, but the smile quickly faded as he furrowed his brows. I pretended not to notice and left with a cheerful demeanor. It wasn't until I had walked far, far away, that I finally sank down under the shade of a tree and let the tears fall uncontrollably. Chapter 4. Erick came home for dinner, but he wasn't alone. He brought Diana with him. In my past life, he had kept his feelings hidden so well that I had no idea he liked Diana. But in this life, he couldn't even control himself before our wedding. Diana greeted Erick's family with a bright smile, her voice sweet and cheerful. She also handed out beautifully wrapped gifts to everyone. Diana was beautiful, elegant, and poised, standing beside Erick, tall and refined. The two of them looked like the perfect match. Meanwhile, I felt like an outsider who didn't belong. Selena, this is for you. Congratulations on your wedding with Erick. Diana walked over to me, holding out a gift. I accepted it graciously and thanked her. She seemed a bit surprised by my reaction. Her smile faltered, and the light in her eyes dimmed. Selena, go prepare the dinner, Erick's mom said naturally, as she had countless times before. I set the gift down and raised my hand, which was wrapped in a bandage. Calmly, I said, I accidentally cut my hand this morning. I won't be able to cook tonight. Erick's older brother rolled his eyes. Seriously? Can't cook just because of a tiny cut? His younger sister chimed in. You're just looking for an excuse to slack off. Erick's mom glanced at me and smiled. Selena's going to be a bride soon. Brides are supposed to be delicate, right? I guess this old woman will have to do the cooking. Diana quickly followed her to the kitchen. Auntie, since Selena's hurt, let me help you. Oh, no, you're a guest. It's fine, Auntie. I'll just lend a hand. Soon, Diana came out carrying a plate of food. Selena, can you take this for me? I need to help Auntie peel some onions. She called out naturally, asking for my help. I stood up, ready to take the plate, but before my hands even touched it, the plate slipped. Scalding hot fish spilled all over Diana, especially her bare legs, which instantly turned red. She cried out, squatting down to clutch her leg, her eyes already brimming with tears. Selena, you did this on purpose, didn't you? Erick exploded with rage, shoving me aside. Chapter 5. I stumbled a few steps before falling hard to the ground. My palm landed directly on the greasy fish, and sharp fish bones pierced into my skin. My forehead hit the edge of the table with a heavy thud. Erick carefully helped Diana up. Then he turned to me with a cold glare. Aren't you going to apologize to Diana? Fighting through the pain, I shakily stood up. Blood dripped from my palm onto my dress, forming a glaring red stain. Erick seemed momentarily stunned, but his expression quickly hardened again. Selena, apologize. Erick, it's okay. I'm sure Selena didn't mean to drop the plate. Diana tugged gently at his sleeve, speaking softly to calm him down. Selena, did you not hear me? Erick's voice turned even colder. I told you to apologize to Diana. And what if I don't? Then I'll cancel the wedding immediately. Erick stood up, towering over me. Selena, you know my temper. I will never take back what I've said. Chapter 6. Standing behind him, Diana curled her lips into a subtle smile when our eyes met. I knew she was trying to provoke me. She didn't want me to apologize. She wanted the wedding to be canceled. She wanted to marry Erick. She didn't want to settle for someone she didn't love, didn't want to take the long way around. She wanted her second chance to finally be the right one, but I wouldn't let her have it. Fine, I'll apologize. I bit my lip, tears welling in my eyes. My face showed a mix of grievance and fear, and at the moment I apologized, Erick visibly let out a small sigh of relief, though he quickly put his cold mask back on. Don't let it happen again. He took the first aid kit his brother handed him. Without even looking at me, he said coldly, the wedding is only a few days away. Behave yourself. I lowered my head, letting silent tears fall. I looked frightened and uneasy. Erick carefully treated Diana's burn and then spoke gently. Let's go to the hospital to make sure it won't leave a scar. Wouldn't that be inconvenient? Selena might get upset. She won't. This was her fault in the first place. After saying that, Erick gave me another icy glare. She causes trouble, and I have to clean up the mess. What right does she have to be upset? That night, Erick didn't come home. Instead, I received several messages from an unfamiliar number. He's worried about my burn and doesn't want me to be in pain. He's staying with me tonight. Go to bed early. Don't wait up. Bride-to-be. She wasn't wrong. I really should go to bed early. There were still many things I had to take care of, like my parents' old houses and shops, and the inheritance they left me. The properties needed to be sold through a trustworthy agency. and once the inheritance was sorted and cleared, I'd take every last penny with me. Not a single cent would be left for Erick. Chapter 7. The day before the wedding. It was time to try on the wedding dress one last time for final adjustments. In my past life, Erick had only briefly tried on his suit before leaving in a hurry. But this time, he didn't leave. Even after I finished trying on the main wedding dress, he was still sitting on the sofa outside, and when I walked out, there was a flicker of amazement in his eyes. The waistline seems a bit loose. Tightening it a little might look better, the stylist suggested softly. Erick agreed. I think so too. Selena has such a slender waist, tighten it just a bit more. But I shook my head. No need. This feels more comfortable. I wasn't going to wear it anyway, so whether it was too big or too small didn't matter. When you first came to our house as a child, you cried day and night. He stood up, walked over, and wrapped his arms around my waist from behind. And now, in the blink of an eye, you've grown into such a beautiful woman. Selena, we're getting married. He lowered his head, his eyes filled with desire, as he leaned in to kiss me, but I raised my hand to stop him. People are watching. I pretended to be shy. Erick chuckled softly, clearly pleased. Then we'll wait until the wedding night, he whispered in my ear. I lowered my head, hiding a silent, mocking smile. The night before the wedding, the bride and groom shouldn't see each other. Since I had no family, I stayed in a hotel. When Erick dropped me off, his phone rang. It was probably Diana. He looked distracted. I deliberately put on a jealous and hurt expression. Erick raised an eyebrow. Come on, tomorrow's the wedding. Don't start acting up over trivial things. Then make sure you come pick me up early tomorrow. I looked up at him, my eyes full of nervousness and anticipation. Erick seemed satisfied. I'll be there at the lucky hour. Don't worry. With that, he left in a hurry. I turned and went upstairs. After double-checking my bank cards and passbooks, I made a few more calls to the agency. Then I took a shower and went to bed. Not a single dream that night. Chapter 8. Erick had trouble sleeping. He dozed off just before dawn, and inexplicably, he dreamed of Selena. In the dream, she was trying on her wedding dress. Every smile, every movement, it was all breathtaking. Somehow, without him noticing, Selena had quietly transformed into a beautiful young woman. Her waist was slender, her skin fair. She wasn't as tall as Diana, but her petite frame was delicate and charming. Unlike Diana's thin figure, Selena still had the soft curves and youthful fullness of a girl. The dream took a sudden inappropriate turn. For the first time, he felt a wild desire for Selena, the girl he had always dismissed. A ringing phone startled him awake, leaving him inexplicably irritable. He even wondered, should he delay his departure by a day? Should he stay until after the wedding night? After all, she had loved him for so many years. Wouldn't that at least be a small return for her devotion? But the voice on the other end of the phone snapped him back to reality. What did you say? The bride is missing? Erick shot up from bed, his hand trembling as he gripped the phone. That's impossible. Did you check the wrong room? No, sir, we didn't go to the wrong room. The front desk said the room was checked out 2 hours ago. We've also been trying to call Miss Selena, but her phone is off. The makeup artist sounded like she was on the verge of tears. A deafening buzz filled Erick's ears. It took him a moment to find his voice. Let me try calling her. Please wait. But Selena's phone was already unreachable. Erick frantically scrolled through his contacts, but he didn't know who to call. He didn't have any of Selena's friends or relatives' numbers. He knew nothing about her. For years, she had followed him faithfully, always chasing after him. He had long believed he had her completely under his control. Even now, he refused to believe Selena would dare leave him. Erick threw on his clothes and drove straight to the hotel. His nerves were in shambles, and he ran 2 red lights along the way. As he neared the hotel, he tried calling Selena again, but there was still no answer. His heart sank lower and lower. Just then, the makeup artist called back. Sir, we found the bride. It was a misunderstanding. Erick felt an overwhelming sense of relief, like a heavy fog had been lifted from his chest. He slammed on the brakes and pulled over. His voice shook. Say that again? Sir, "We found the bride. She said she wasn't sleeping well last night and changed rooms at the last minute." The makeup artist continued speaking, but Erick wasn't listening. Leaning back in his seat, he suddenly laughed. He had been insane. Selena loved him so deeply it was practically in her bones. There was no way she'd run away. And crazier still, he had almost believed it. How ridiculous, how absurd. Chapter 9. Before the wedding, Erick's family had consulted a fortune teller to analyze their compatibility. Due to certain taboos, the groom was not allowed to personally fetch the bride. When the bridal procession returned to the wedding venue with the bride, Erick was already waiting downstairs. He had changed into a well-fitted, expensive black suit, holding a bouquet of flowers. However, as the groomsmen stepped out of the car, their expressions were unusual. The bridesmaids, who were supposed to be present, were nowhere to be seen. The bride sat inside the car, her face obscured by a white veil. Only the faint outline of her delicate profile could be seen. Erick hadn't expected to feel particularly excited. After all, marrying Selena had always carried a sense of reluctance. Yet, for some reason, the sight of the veiled bride stirred something deep inside him. A ripple of unexplainable emotion, mixed with a hint of secret delight. He thought of Selena's stunning appearance the last time she tried on her wedding dress. Thought of the way her gentle, love-filled eyes gazed at him. And somehow, a soft tenderness quietly blossomed in his heart. Beyond career success, a woman's unwavering love and devotion for years could also make a man feel incredibly proud and fulfilled. With the bouquet in hand, Erick slowly approached the car. The groomsmen, all old classmates and friends, looked at him hesitantly, yet none of them spoke up. The car door opened, and Erick extended his hand. "Selena." What he didn't realize was that as he spoke her name, a faint smile had already crept into his eyes. A slender, soft hand wrapped in white lace gently rested in his palm. Erick immediately held it. But the moment their hands touched, something felt wrong. This didn't feel like Selena's hand. Her fingers were longer, her skin softer, her hand fit perfectly into his palm. At that moment, the bride stepped out of the car, through the snowy white veil. She looked at Erick shyly, but the moment their eyes met, Erick abruptly let go of her hand. The color drained from his face in an instant, and all around them, silence fell like death. Diana's expression shifted from shock to disbelief, and finally to humiliation, her eyes red with shame. Chapter 10. The bouquet in Erick's hand slipped and fell to the ground. He turned around, grabbing someone at random, his voice hoarse as he demanded, "What's going on? Where's Selena? Didn't you go to the hotel to pick her up? You didn't even notice you brought the wrong person? What the hell were you doing?" His emotions spiraled out of control, and his voice suddenly rose. "We don't know either. When we went to pick up the bride, only Diana was there in the room. Yeah, we never even saw Selena." Erick turned sharply, his eyes fixed on the makeup artist. "Didn't you say the bride had been found? This is what you meant by found?" "Yes, sir. It's not my fault." The makeup artist was on the verge of tears. She was just an employee, what could she do? If it weren't for that lady promising to take full responsibility, she would never have dared to lie about something like this. She just wanted to earn her pay. Nothing more. "Erick, it's not her fault. It was my arrangement." Diana stepped out of the car, standing tall with her back straight. Her eyes were red, but her face remained calm and composed. "Selena is missing, and the wedding is about to start. I didn't want you to be humiliated, so I came up with this plan. If you're angry, blame me, yell at me. No one else is involved." As she finished speaking, Diana lowered her head slightly. The tears she had been holding back finally fell. Then she smiled sadly. "It's because I love you too much. I acted foolishly. Erick, why don't we just go with it? Haven't you always had feelings for Diana too? Besides, Diana is more compatible with you than that little orphan bride. On such an important day, she throws a tantrum and disappears. Do you expect to send a grand procession to bring her back? Who knows what kind of drama she'll stir up next? The auspicious hour is almost here. Erick, make a decision." The crowd erupted into chaotic chatter. Diana gradually stopped crying and looked at Erick with faint hope in her eyes. Erick stood frozen for a long time, Finally, he slowly turned back to face the crowd. Diana looked stunning in the white wedding dress. He couldn't deny it, he and Diana were indeed like-minded. After spending so much time together, he did feel something for her. But he also knew clearly that the one he was supposed to marry was Selena. In his heart, he had already considered her his wife, even if, deep down, he had begun to feel that Selena no longer deserved him. He had never thought of breaking off the engagement, though, instead, he let her cling to him, never pushing her away. What Erick didn't expect was that he hadn't even made up his mind to abandon Selena yet. He had followed through with their agreement to get married. Even though he hid the fact that he was leaving for an overseas project, he had decided to delay his departure for a few days, to give her a perfect wedding and wedding night. If they were lucky, she might even get pregnant, and with that, she could secure her place in his family. He would have felt he had repaid her family's kindness and her years of love. But now, Selena had vanished the night before their wedding. Chapter 11. Erick couldn't understand it. Where did she get the nerve to pull a stunt like this? Just because he had been a little closer to Diana? Just because he defended Diana when she got burned and blamed her for it? But what gave Selena the confidence to cause such a scene? Wasn't she afraid this wedding might be completely called off? Or did she think that, by relying on her parents' past kindness, she could do whatever she wanted and toy with him? Erick had never lost his temper like this before. For a moment, he even considered doing what his friends had suggested, just going along with it and marrying Diana instead. But for some reason, when he looked at Diana standing there, beautiful and elegant, he couldn't shake the image of Selena from his mind. The wedding dress Diana wore was the one Selena had chosen for herself. Yet Diana was taller than Selena. She was also thinner, the waistline was looser, and the chest area looked empty. Erick couldn't stop himself from remembering how Selena looked in that dress just yesterday. She had stood before him, delicate and graceful, yet curvy and alluring. He had truly been stunned by her beauty. Selena usually dressed plainly. She preferred loose, casual clothes, so he had never realized that, when dressed up, she could look so stunning. Erick. Diana's voice broke through his thoughts as she softly called his name, but Erick suddenly raised his hand, tore off the groom's boutonniere from his chest, and tossed it to the ground. Selena isn't feeling well. The wedding is postponed. After saying this, he didn't look at anyone. He didn't spare Diana another glance. He simply turned and walked away. Diana stood frozen, her expression shifting to shock. Then her face turned red, bright red. Everyone's eyes were on her. Some looked at her with pity, others with indignation on her behalf. But most were just waiting to see her humiliation unfold. Diana's entire body trembled. Her fingertips felt ice cold, shaking uncontrollably. She had never experienced such humiliation in her life. Even though she came from a modest family, she had worked hard to get into a top university in the capital. As the beauty of the architecture department, she had always been admired and adored by the male students. Even Erick had always been attentive and devoted to her. And yet, the very man she had treated like a simp had just publicly humiliated her like this. How dare he? How dare he? Diana yanked off her veil, as tears poured down her face. She threw it onto the ground in fury. Chapter 12. It wasn't until I boarded the plane and it took off that I finally let out a long sigh of relief. The plane soared high above the clouds. I leaned back in my seat and gently closed my eyes. Everything from my past life, like a nightmare, came to an abrupt end at this moment. I didn't know what the road ahead would look like. But one thing was certain, after leaving that ungrateful family behind, my future could only get brighter. When I was 5, my parents died in an earthquake. In that critical moment, they pushed Erick out of harm's way, saving his life. Naturally, Erick's family took me in as a way of repaying their debt. They even arranged a marriage between me and Erick, so I would always have someone to rely on. But as I grew older, that so-called gratitude began to sour. As Erick's future grew brighter, I, an orphan, became the lucky one who had climbed up by attaching myself to his family. Later, Erick went abroad for his aid work and disappeared without a trace. I sold the houses my parents had left me to pay for Erick's mother's medical bills. She was paralyzed for 5 years, and I cared for her every single day. Later, Erick's younger siblings got married, had children, and started families of their own. His mother told me that, as the eldest sister-in-law, I should take care of them, so I willingly gave away my parents' inheritance. When his sister got married, it was me who gave her 360,000 yuan as dowry support. When she gave birth to her daughter, I prepared a 60,000 yuan red envelope to help her save face. When her husband abused her, I fought for her justice, helping her through the divorce lawsuit and personally bringing her and her child back home. But in the end, when Erick wanted me out, it was also his sister who said dismissively, "We've repaid your family's kindness after raising you for over 10 years. We even sacrificed my brother's happiness to do so. If you have any conscience left, you should step aside and make room for my sister-in-law." Later, when Erick returned with Diana, it was his mother and sister who happily accepted Diana, approving their marriage, and they silently agreed when Erick kicked me out. The truth was, Erick had been sending money home all those years, and he and Diana had already been living together overseas, even having children. Everyone in his family knew. I was the only one left in the dark, squeezed dry until there was nothing left of me. And in the end, I died ill, broken, and alone. Thinking about all of this, I could only laugh bitterly. If my parents could see all this from the afterlife, would they regret sacrificing their lives to save Erick? I would never know the answer, and after living through 2 lifetimes, I no longer believe that good people will always be rewarded. Chapter 13. Erick made countless phone calls, but none of them went through. Selena had already blocked and deleted all of his family's numbers. At first, Erick's mother didn't take it seriously. "Erick, don't go looking for her. What kind of new bride dares to pull such a stunt and act so high and mighty? She just wants you to give in." But we won't. In her opinion, Selena was just an orphan with no one to rely on. She had eyes only for her son, her pride and joy, and it was impossible for her to truly leave. This was just a tantrum, a way to vent her anger. There was no way she'd be willing to throw away such a good marriage. But Erick stood by the window, unmoving. A heavy sense of unease lingered in his chest. Selena wasn't playing games. She wasn't trying to retreat in order to advance. She was genuinely angry, genuinely unwilling to marry him anymore. He thought about the moment she pushed him away when he tried to kiss her during the dress fitting. He thought about how obediently she had sent him off at the hotel last night. No longer clinging to him like before, she used to get anxious at the slightest sign of trouble, and any woman around him had been a cause for jealousy and insecurity. She cared about him, cared so much that it had started to wear him out. That was why he decided to hide his plans to go abroad for aid work. He had repaid the debt he owed her family. He didn't owe her anything anymore. He could leave with a clear conscience, ready to pursue the life he truly wanted. But never in his wildest dreams did he expect that the one to walk away first would be Selena. "Mom, what about my gold jewelry?" Erick's sister suddenly spoke up. "You promised me that as soon as she moved in, she'd buy me a full set of gold jewelry. Now she's gone, completely disappeared. Does that mean my jewelry is gone too?" Erick's heart skipped a beat. Selena's parents had left her a considerable inheritance. Besides properties and shops, there was a substantial amount of cash in savings. Strictly speaking, it looked like Erick's family had supported Selena all these years. But in reality, Erick knew how much of Selena's money had been spent on them. Now, they couldn't get in touch with her, but as long as her assets were still there, it meant she didn't really plan to leave. She was just trying to scare him, to make a point. "Why are you panicking? Once she comes crawling back and begs your brother to marry her, you can get whatever you want from her." Erick's mother brushed it off, but his sister pouted. "And what if she never comes back?" "Don't be ridiculous. You know how much she loves your brother." "That's true. If it weren't for how much she loves him, I wouldn't have agreed to this marriage in the first place." Suddenly, Erick turned around and spoke. "Mom, go out and start asking around right now." "Asking about what?" "Find out if Selena's properties are still under her name." Erick's mother immediately panicked. "Erick, what do you mean by that? If they're still there, it means Selena is just throwing a tantrum. But if they're all gone..." Erick suddenly let out a bitter laugh and didn't finish his sentence. But his mother quickly figured it out. She couldn't sit still anymore and rushed toward the door. "I'll go ask around right now." Those few properties and shops she owns aren't the kind of things you can sell overnight. Brother, what do you mean? Did Selena really run away from the wedding? Erick's sister immediately panicked. She had already bragged about her gold jewelry to her cousins. If Selena really ran away, wouldn't her jewelry be gone too? How could she possibly face them now? But Erick only sneered and looked at her coldly. Why are you panicking now? Didn't you always hate her? Didn't you say you didn't want her as your sister-in-law? Who would turn down money? Exactly, no one would turn down money. That was why Erick's family had always looked down on Selena, yet still clung to the engagement and refused to let her go. And deep down, wasn't Erick thinking the same thing? Selena had money but no support. Her family had all died in the earthquake, and she loved him so deeply, without reservation. Marrying her meant everything she owned would eventually become his family's. That was why he felt secure enough to apply for overseas aid work without any concerns. His sister was selfish and greedy, but wasn't he just as despicable? Brother, do you think she's really gone? Erick walked out with a blank expression. I don't know, brother. What if she's really gone? What do we do then? Mom said we're buying a new villa. The deposit is already paid. Erick let out another cold laugh. Whoever wants the villa can pay for it themselves. Brother. Erick slammed the door behind him, shutting out his sister's sharp cries. Chapter 14. I moved to a southern city I had always liked. Back when I applied for college, I had chosen Beijing because Erick was going there. But the truth was, my dream school wasn't in Beijing at all. Now, with plenty of free time and financial independence, I finally had the means to pursue the dreams I had set aside. After settling in, I bought a 2-bedroom apartment near the university I'd always admired. After resting for 2 weeks, I began preparing for graduate school. I hadn't been able to attend this university for undergrad, but studying here as a graduate student would be just as fulfilling. In my past life, Erick returned successful, with a flourishing career. He reunited with his family, moved into a new house, and married someone else. He couldn't have been more proud of himself. But what about me? While spring bloomed beautifully for everyone else, I arrived only to find it barren. This time, I would make sure to bloom for myself. In the 2nd month after I settled in, Erick, who was supposed to be abroad for his aid project, suddenly showed up. Spring was at its peak that day. I had just stepped out of the university library, and there he was, standing downstairs. He looked thinner, but he still stood out in the crowd. If he hadn't, I wouldn't have poured all my love into him during the innocence of my youth. But now, the man whose gaze used to make my heart race, couldn't stir even the smallest ripple in me. I held my books and kept walking. Erick called my name softly. Selena, what do you want? I looked at him, my gaze indifferent, as if he were any other stranger passing by. I've been looking for you. What for? You're my fiancé. We're engaged. Engaged. Not married. No license. No legal standing. Selena. His white shirt was as spotless as ever. The way he wore glasses had once been my favorite look. But now, standing in front of me, he was everything I used to love. And yet, none of it mattered anymore. After you left, I thought about everything. I realize now that I was wrong about Diana. I only admired her academic achievements. There was never anything romantic between us. I've already made things clear to Diana. She went abroad 2 weeks ago and won't be coming back. Selena, I promise, nothing like that will ever happen again. Come back with me. The wedding preparations are still in place. We can hold the ceremony anytime you're ready. And what makes you think I'll go back with you? Is it because I used to love you? I smiled at him. Erick, haven't you figured it out yet? From the moment I walked away, you became nothing to me. Selena, I know what happened hurt you. I've already reflected on it. Nothing ever happened between me and Diana. I swear. Does that even matter? Erick, I don't care about you and Diana, because I stopped loving you a long time ago. That's impossible. We grew up together. Selena, you've loved me for so many years. I loved you for years. And yet that didn't stop you from applying for an overseas aid project. Planning to leave right after the wedding, did it? Erick's expression changed drastically. How do you know about that? I also know you were going with Diana, and if nothing unexpected happened, you two would have started a new life abroad. Meanwhile, I would have been left behind, kept in the dark, taking care of your family, spending my inheritance, draining myself dry, only to be thrown out when I was no longer useful. Isn't that right, Erick? His face went pale, and he stared at me like he'd seen a ghost. But I didn't let him off the hook. I stepped closer. If my guess is right, your mom is seriously ill, isn't she? Erick stumbled back a step. How do you know that? Judging by the timing, his mother had probably just been diagnosed with a serious illness. She was too proud to let the news spread, so no one outside the family would know yet. So, Erick, did you come looking for me because you genuinely regret your mistakes and want to make it up to me? Or was it just so I'd come back to take care of your mom and hand over my inheritance to patch up your family's endless debts? How can you think of us that way? Erick's face turned pale and blue with anger. She raised you for over 10 years. Selena, doesn't that count for anything? The money your family left me has more than paid back that so-called kindness. Erick, stop looking for me. I have nothing to do with you or your family anymore. And with you, there's nothing left between us. With that, I brushed past him and headed toward the campus gates. But Erick wasn't willing to give up and chased after me again. Selena, calm down. Think about it, everything we've been through. Can you really let it all go? I already have. Erick, you should let it go too. Instead of wasting time pestering me, you'd be better off figuring out how to make more money. Your family's going to need it. Selena, do you really have to be this heartless? I laughed. Erick, when your entire family plotted against me, did any of you ever feel an ounce of guilt? But Selena, we never actually hurt you. Everything you're saying is just your own speculation. So what? Even if it's just speculation, I made sure to kill the possibility before it could grow. Is that wrong? Selena, we've known each other for so long. Can you guarantee that if you marry someone else, they won't take advantage of you? I laughed again. And what makes you think marriage is the only path for me? Chapter 15. Erick lingered in the city for a week. In the end, I had to call the police before he finally left. Unwillingly, it seemed he finally realized I wasn't coming back. After he left, he didn't bother me again. When I was admitted to graduate school, old classmates from my hometown reached out to me privately. They said Erick's family had become a disgrace and could hardly make ends meet. More and more people started speaking out, revealing the truth, that his family was ungrateful, heartless, and had bullied the daughter of their benefactors. So, his mother suffered her retribution, paralyzed in bed. His brother, a jobless loafer, caused enough trouble to end up in jail for several months. And his sister, who failed her college entrance exams, started dating a delinquent. Not wanting to care for their mother, she moved into her boyfriend's house instead. The entire family depended solely on Erick. Medical bills, along with the penalty for breaking the villa contract, drained every penny he had. Now, Erick was in a miserable state. His former friends and classmates had cut ties with him. When I heard all this, I merely smiled. Without me, their human ATM, his family had finally collapsed under its own weight. But what did any of this have to do with me? I had a house, a car, and plenty of savings. I could continue enjoying a carefree student life. Maybe I'd meet someone new one day. Or maybe I wouldn't, and living alone wasn't bad either. The dirty swamp of Erick's family could no longer taint me. Later, I heard Erick abandoned his family and reunited with Diana. They settled in Shanghai. And Diana gave birth to a son. Their life seemed good for a while. But a few years later, Erick returned alone, disgraced and empty-handed. By then, his family had sold everything they owned. All they had left was a shabby rental apartment. His mother, deprived of proper care, had passed away the year before. His brother had fled to Myanmar for internet scams, and no one knew if he was alive. His sister, married young with 3 kids, was frequently beaten by her husband. Erick lived alone in that dingy apartment, drinking himself into oblivion. And as for Diana's son, he wasn't even Erick's child. She had only used Erick as a stand-in father. Once he had worked hard and raised the boy, Diana reunited with the real father and kicked Erick out. When I returned to my hometown to visit my parents' graves, I saw him once. He was barely in his 30s, Yet his hair was already half gray, reeking of alcohol. He slouched on the side of the street, dazed and broken. Passers-by looked at him with nothing but disgust. Who would have thought that this was the same Eric who once stood so tall and proud? I felt no pity for him, but I did feel a tinge of regret for what could have been, because back when we were kids, Eric had treated me very, very well, but we grew up, and we changed. When I walked past him, he seemed to recognize me, stumbling to his feet in excitement, but then suddenly turned away, covering his face. I acted as though I hadn't seen him at all. I didn't stop walking. Spring had come again. The flowers were blooming beautifully, and I wouldn't look back. I wouldn't forgive. I would simply keep walking, forever and always, toward my own spring.